started with a gate left wide open. No guards on watch. No warning shots. No resistance. Just silence. And for the American soldiers approaching Dachau in April 1945, that silence didn't feel like victory. Felt wrong. Because what they were about to walk into wasn't a battlefield. It was something they had never been trained to understand. And what happened next would remain one of the most complicated, debated, and emotionally charged moments of the entire war. April 29, 1945. The war in Europe was almost over. American forces were pushing deeper into southern Germany, moving fast, encountering scattered resistance as the Nazi regime began to collapse from within. For many soldiers, it felt like the final stretch. One last push, and it would all be over. But just outside Munich, a unit from the U.S. 45th Infantry Division was given a new objective: secure a location known as Dachau. At the time, most of the soldiers didn't know what Dachau really was. They had heard rumors, whispers of prison camps, of political prisoners, of something darker, but nothing concrete. Nothing they could fully grasp. To them, it was just another assignment. Move in. Secure the area. Eliminate resistance. Simple. At least, that's what they thought. As they approached the outer perimeter, something immediately stood out. There was no organized defense. No coordinated response. Just scattered SS guards, some fleeing, others surrendering without a fight. It didn't make sense. This wasn't how a fortified position behaved. And then, they saw the train, parked just outside the camp. Dozens of rail cars. Silent. Still. The soldiers moved closer, cautious at first. But as they got near, the smell hit them. It stopped them cold. Something wasn't right. Some of the men opened the doors. And in that moment, everything changed. What they found inside wasn't soldiers. It wasn't supplies. It was something far worse. Something that instantly shattered any remaining illusion about what this place was. And suddenly, the mission wasn't just a mission anymore. It became personal. The soldiers pushed forward into the camp itself. Inside, the scene was overwhelming. Prisoners, weak, starving, barely able to stand, began emerging from barracks. Some tried to speak. Others simply stared. Many couldn't even process what was happening. Liberation had come. But it didn't feel real yet. For the American troops, training had prepared them for combat. For enemy fire. For strategic decisions under pressure. But nothing had prepared them for this. The scale of suffering. The conditions. The realization of what had been happening behind those walls. And then, they encountered the SS guards who remained. Some had already surrendered. Others were being rounded up, disarmed, placed under guard. And this is where things began to shift. Because the emotional state of the American soldiers was changing rapidly. Shock turned into anger. Anger turned into something deeper, something harder to control. These weren't enemy soldiers in a typical sense anymore. To many of the Americans, they represented something else entirely. Something they had just witnessed firsthand. Something they couldn't unsee. Commanders on the ground were now facing a completely different kind of challenge. Not how to take the camp, but how to maintain order among their own men. Because the situation was becoming volatile. Fast. Groups of SS guards were being gathered in different areas. Some were cooperative. Others were silent. A few tried to explain themselves. But explanations didn't matter anymore. Not after what had been discovered. Tension was building. And not everyone was waiting for orders. There were moments, small at first, where discipline started to crack. Where individual soldiers made decisions, driven not by command, but by emotion. Other troops watched. Some hesitated. Others stepped in. And officers began issuing sharp, urgent commands to restore control. But the question was already hanging in the air. How do you enforce restraint in a moment like this? How do you tell soldiers to stay calm after what they've just seen? The line between justice and revenge was becoming dangerously thin. And then, one moment changed everything. A group of captured SS guards was being held near a wall. American troops stood nearby, weapons ready, tension thick. orders unclear. And in that moment, something happened. Something that would later be investigated, debated, even questioned decades after the war ended. Because what took place next wasn't part of any official plan. It wasn't ordered from above. Came from the ground, from the men who were there, from what they had just witnessed, and from a decision made in seconds. A decision that would define this moment in history. But here's the part most people don't know. Not everyone agreed with what happened next. Not even among the American ranks. And just as quickly as things escalated, there were those who tried to stop it, to regain control, to reestablish order before it went too far. Because now, the Americans weren't just liberators. They were standing at a crossroads, and what they chose to do next would shape how this day would be remembered forever. The shots echoed, but not in the way anyone expected. For a brief moment, time seemed to split. Some soldiers froze, others acted, and a few, caught between orders and instinct, hesitated just long enough to realize things had gone too far. What happened at Dachau that day wasn't a single, clear-cut event. It was a series of moments, decisions made in seconds, actions driven by emotion, confusion, and the weight of what had just been uncovered. When American forces first entered the camp, their mission was simple: secure the area. But the reality they encountered changed everything. Groups of SS guards had already surrendered. They were disarmed, contained, and under control, at least for a while, because as more soldiers moved through the camp, the emotional pressure kept building. Each new discovery added fuel. Each interaction with prisoners deepened the sense that this wasn't just another enemy position. This was something else entirely. And in that environment, discipline became fragile. Some American troops began treating the captured guards not as prisoners of war, but as perpetrators of something far beyond the battlefield. Others tried to maintain protocol, to follow the rules, to keep things under control. But control was slipping. In one area of the camp, a group of SS personnel had been lined up and guarded. An officer was present. Orders had been given. But the situation was tense, unstable. And then, without clear authorization, gunfire broke out. It didn't last long. But it didn't need to, because in that moment, the line had been crossed. Some soldiers stepped back immediately. Others looked stunned. A few tried to intervene, shouting for it to stop. And according to later accounts, one officer physically stepped in, putting an end to it before it escalated further. But by then, the damage was done. Word spread quickly through the ranks. Confusion followed. What had just happened? Was it justified? Was it ordered? Or was it something else entirely? In the hours that followed, higher command became aware of the incident. Reports were filed. Statements were taken. And an investigation was launched. Because even in the final days of the war, there were rules, standards, expectations, and what had occurred at Dachau didn't fit neatly into any of them. Some witnesses described it as a loss of control. Others framed it as an emotional reaction to unimaginable conditions. A few defended the actions outright, but not everyone agreed. There were American soldiers that day who refused to participate, who actively tried to stop it, who believed that even in the face of what they had seen, there had to be limits. That perspective would later become a critical part of the story, because Dachau wasn't just about what was discovered. It was also about how people responded to that discovery, and how quickly moral clarity could become complicated under pressure. The official investigation, led by the U.S. Army, gathered testimony from multiple individuals. It sought to determine whether war crimes had been committed by American troops. A difficult question, especially given the circumstances. In the end, no formal charges were pursued. The case was effectively closed, quietly, overshadowed by the end of the war in Europe just days later. But the incident didn't disappear. Historians would revisit it, debate it, analyze it from every angle, because it raised uncomfortable questions. Not just about what happened at Dachau, but about human behavior in extreme conditions, about the limits of discipline, about what happens when soldiers are pushed beyond anything they were trained for. And decades later, those questions still don't have simple answers. What would you have done in that moment? Faced with that reality, that shock, that anger, would you have followed orders? Or would something else have taken over? Dachau stands as one of the most powerful reminders of the end of World War II, not just because it was liberated, but because of what that liberation revealed, and how those who witnessed it responded. Because history isn't just shaped by plans and strategies. It's shaped by moments, split-second decisions, and the people who have to live with them afterward. And in the case of Dachau, those moments still echo today.